As the joint US-Israeli war on Iran escalates, we are today having a conversation which Western media consistently avoids. Today, we deconstruct the global North narrative to center the global South perspective. We are calling out the ultimate hypocrisy. Why is it that when the North expands its nuclear arsenal, it's called strategic stability, but when India or Pakistan does the same, it's met with warnings of mounting regional instability? Today, we ask the hard questions. Why is the nuclear status of nations like the US, France, or perhaps even Israel accepted as a global given, while telling nations like Iran they can never cross the line? From the politics of deterrence to the global non-proliferation divide, we are looking at the data, not just the headlines. We'll also examine India's nuclear-powered AI boom and the human cost of uranium mining in Pakistan. This is the nuclear debate seen through the lens of the South. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sahil Murli Meghani and you're watching the South Era Report. Nuclear weapons were fundamental to the structure of the post-World War II order, and at one point, the two main nuclear superpowers, the USA and USSR, threatened each other and the entire world with mutually assured destruction. These weapons were so powerful that those who controlled them went to great lengths to ensure others could not have them. And those efforts to restrain countries has meant these weapons have largely remained in the hands of developed global North nations. But when India and Pakistan began testing nukes, it fundamentally changed the equation. And with that came a perennial sense of panic from the West. But are those fears well-founded? Angad Singh looks into this question.
Should the world trust India and Pakistan with nuclear weapons? Whenever the two countries are in conflict, the same warnings return.
Two neighbors with nuclear weapons on the brink of war.
The main worry for the world and the region are the nuclear missiles aimed at each other.
Pakistan and India would have been a nuclear war.
This fear-mongering has always come with a subtext. If nuclear weapons spread beyond the West, the entire world would be in danger. But here's the strange part. India and Pakistan have now both had nuclear weapons for more than 25 years. And yet, the nuclear apocalypse that headlines have predicted and world leaders cautioned against never quite came. So what if one of the most common assumptions about the nuclear age is just wrong? What if nuclear weapons in the global South don't actually make the world less safe, but move regional conflicts towards stability instead? To dig into this question, we need to take a look at how the global nuclear order was built and who it was designed to benefit. So to understand this debate, we need to go back to the beginning of the nuclear age. In 1945, the United States became the first and briefly the only country with nuclear weapons. The atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated America's overwhelming military power at the dawn of the post-World War II order.
Beneath that sinister pall of smoke, the world's most destructive force has been unleashed.
But that monopoly didn't last. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first nuclear weapon, which began a Cold War arms race. And over the next 2 decades, Britain, France, and China also developed nuclear weapons. And by the 1960s, world leaders feared the technology might spread beyond this small group. So in 1968, governments got together and negotiated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT.
Within a few years, the whole world would have been darkened by a black cloud of fear. The purpose of this treaty is to dispel that gathering cloud and to ensure that the vast forces locked in the atom are devoted to the welfare of mankind rather than to its destruction.
On paper, the treaty aimed to stop nuclear proliferation, but it also formally recognized just 5 countries as legitimate nuclear powers. the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China. These are the same 5 states that hold permanent seats on the UN Security Council. And many in the global south saw this system as one of nuclear apartheid.
We don't believe in any kind of discriminatory treatment. We are willing for the banning of all atomic tests if everybody else agrees to it.
India, Pakistan, and Israel never signed this agreement. And in 1974, India conducted what it called a peaceful nuclear explosion, triggering international condemnation. And then, in 1998, India carried out 5 nuclear tests as part of Operation Shakti, and Pakistan responded with 5 tests of its own within weeks. The world condemned both countries, but by October of that same year, they were meeting each other to ensure that the situation didn't spiral out of control.
After our successful nuclear tests, we have signified our desire to eschew a nuclear arms race with India. We are prepared to take further steps in tandem with India for nuclear stabilization.
We have put forward a broad package of confidence-building measures. These range from the avoidance of nuclear conflict to measures for developing secure, dedicated, and fail-safe communication links.
But after 3 previous wars between India and Pakistan, many observers predicted disaster, especially now that the 2 rivals had acquired nukes. And just a year later, those fears seemed about to come true. In 1999, as the 2 countries fought the Kargil War along the disputed Kashmir border, major papers were warning that nuclear danger looms large and that the region was the most dangerous place on Earth. But something like the opposite happened. The war actually remained fairly limited, the lowest intensity conflict between the 2 countries up to that point. And under pressure from the United States, the fighting stayed localized. In fact, the 3 largest wars between India and Pakistan happened before nuclearization, and after Kargil, India and Pakistan have not fought another full-scale war. However, there have been crises, 5 major ones, mostly triggered by terrorist attacks in India. Each time, fears of nuclear war returned. And to be fair, those warnings didn't just come from Western media. Indian and Pakistani leaders have also engaged in nuclear saber rattling. But each of these crises eventually de-escalated, often with outside diplomatic pressure, and with far fewer casualties than the wars of the past. So why hasn't the nightmare scenario happened? Well, according to many experts, nuclear weapons themselves may be part of the answer. If nuclear weapons appear to actually constrain escalation in South Asia, why then does the Western narrative still focus so heavily on impending nuclear catastrophe? Well, part of that answer may lie in how the global nuclear order was designed. From the beginning, the NPT divided the world into 2 categories: countries that were allowed to possess nuclear weapons and those who were not. And when countries sought to break out of that hierarchy, it was politically destabilizing. For example, after the 1998 tests, India and Pakistan were both initially treated as pariah states, but geopolitics eventually forced a shift. Pakistan's relationship with the West was normalized because of its role in the war on terror in neighboring Afghanistan. And in 2008, the United States signed a landmark civilian nuclear agreement with India, partly because Washington saw India as a strategic counterweight to China. In the years since, the story of a nuclear-armed India and Pakistan has challenged the long-standing assumptions of the nuclear world order. The 2 countries have shown us that indeed, nuclear weapons can increase risk. But paradoxically, that risk can also force bitter rivals to limit just how far violence goes if and when conflict breaks out. And when Western voices inevitably suggest that countries in the global south are more likely to destroy the entire world in nuclear conflict, it's worth asking, is their fear actually grounded in history? Or is this anxiety about something else entirely? Less about the loss of stability and peace, and more about shifting hierarchies that for decades have favored the global north.
That's an interesting question, Angad, because more states are investing in their nuclear capabilities today than at any point since the Cold War. And after Israeli and US strikes on Iran, some analysts warn the attacks could accelerate the very nuclear program they were meant to stop. So, can military force actually end a country's nuclear ambitions? Sarah Gill reports.
Can the US-Israeli war actually end Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Yet just 8 months later, a massive joint US and Israeli mission launched another attack on Iran for the same reason.
They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore.
But here's what isn't being said. You can bomb a building, but you cannot destroy nuclear latency. That is, the technical, material, and intellectual capacity to build a nuclear weapon. And by attacking Iran, the US may be doing the exact opposite of what it intends, accelerating the very nuclear threat it says it wants to stop. So how did Iran develop this latency? Well, to understand this, we need to look back. The US actually helped start Iran's nuclear power capabilities in 1957 under the American Atoms for Peace program. The Shah of Iran gained US support for civilian nuclear tech. A decade later, America even provided Iran its fast nuclear reactor and the uranium to fuel it. In 1968, Iran signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, an international agreement between countries to not develop nuclear arsenal. But in 1979, Iran's revolution changed everything. It removed the Shah and relations with the West deteriorated. But crucially, the first supreme leader, Ruhollah Khomeini, initially had no interest in nuclear power. That changed dramatically during the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Iraq struck Iranian cities with ballistic missiles and used chemical weapons against Iranian troops and civilians with very little international condemnation. This is when Iran's organized but hidden nuclear weapons program began. It stayed clandestine until 2002 when the Natanz nuclear facility was exposed. For years, sanctions followed until 2015 when there was a moment of hope under US President Barack Obama. Iran, alongside several other countries, signed the JCPOA deal. Iran agreed to curb its nuclear program for a relief in sanctions. It was hailed as a landmark victory. But in 2018, Trump withdrew from the deal, leading some to question whether Trump ever wanted a deal with Iran at all. Because now, in 2026, the war has escalated. US and Israeli strikes have killed Iran's second supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and thousands of civilians. The justification is that Iran was close to a bomb. But how close were they really? Because the International Atomic Energy Agency paints a very different picture.
Were the Iranians days or weeks away from building a bomb, from having a bomb?
No.
Now, what Iran did have was around 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to roughly 60%. That is not weapons grade, but it is capable of becoming it. And this is where things start to get complicated. Because just hours before the current wave of strikes, Oman's foreign minister revealed a breakthrough, even appearing on American TV to announce it.
It really makes the enrichment argument less relevant because now we are talking about zero stockpiling. And that is very, very important because if you cannot stockpile material that is enriched, then there is no way you can actually create a bomb, whether you enrich or don't enrich. And I think this is really something that has been missed a lot by the media, and I want to clarify that from the standpoint of a mediator.
So explain that. So the enriched material, the things that could be used as nuclear fuel for a bomb, you're saying Iran would not keep on their own soil?
They would give it up.
They would give it up?
They will not be able to actually accumulate that material that will enable them to create a bomb.
So why would the US bomb a country it was on the verge of winning against at the negotiating table? And while America may have achieved its supposed immediate goal, political scientists who study strikes like these are clear. Bombing a state doesn't remove the desire for a nuclear deterrent. It strengthens it. And the evidence is already visible. Since 2020, China has gone from roughly 250 warheads to over 600. Finland has in recent weeks lifted a nuclear ban it had held since the 1980s. And the United States, the self-declared enforcer of non-proliferation, says it wants to resume nuclear testing for the first time since 1992. So the question we started with was simple. Could these strikes end Iran's nuclear ambitions? The evidence suggests something very different. They may have done the opposite, and not just for Iran, but for the world.
For more on this, let's go to our panel. Joining us from London, Alex Shears, who is a defense and international security analyst, and from Washington, D.C., Sarang Shidore, director of the Global South Program and the Quincy Institute. A warm welcome to you both. I'm going to come to each of you for quick opening comments, and then as the discussion warms up, we'll go in depth. First to you, Alex. There are two main sets of arguments. Argument A, mostly the Western construct, warns that if nations like Iran were to develop nuclear weapons, it would heighten regional instability and make proxy wars more likely. Interestingly, this argument comes from the same bloc of countries that themselves possess nuclear weapons. Point to be noted. Then there is argument B, which argues that nuclear weapons tend to discourage major wars because they create strong deterrents. Factually, that's a strong argument, because barring limited conventional conflicts like the 1999 Kargil War between India and Pakistan, the Sino-Soviet conflict of 1969, or the Indo-China border clash in 2020, by and large, no two nuclear-armed states have engaged in total full-scale war. Now, these are two diametrically opposite viewpoints. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. In your estimate, Alex, what's that truth?
Well, I think we have to deal with the reality that since the advent of nuclear weapons, the shift in the thinking on geopolitical engagement with regards to military establishment has made it as so that the aim is no longer to win wars necessarily, but rather to ensure that wars don't happen at all. And over the last 80 odd years, I think that adage has proven to be true, that since the advent of nuclear weapons, we have not seen great powers engage each other directly in conflict. This was true during the Cold War between the United States and the USSR, and it's true in many other cases. In the case that you mentioned, the Kargil War and the dyadic relationship that India and Pakistan has, you're right. We have seen flare-ups. We have seen flashes of direct exchanges and conflict of a sort, but they have remained limited. And I think that's primarily because at the end of the day, what these countries realize is that you cannot win a nuclear war, and therefore prolonging conflicts between nuclear powers has been sort of counterintuitive to these particular countries. So I would say, like you said, the truth lies somewhere in between. But the reality is that nuclear weapons, whilst dangerous, have served a very valuable strategic deterrent role in international politics.
And Sarang, if I can come to you, I want you to talk about the North-South divide when it comes to nuclear weapons. Why do many countries in the global South see the global non-proliferation system differently from the way Western powers do?
Thank you for having me on the show. I think there's a very different perception in the global South because of promises not kept by the global North, really. Because if you look at the non-proliferation regime that started in the 60s in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had a agreement, a treaty, non-proliferation treaty. It is somewhat misleading in terms of its name, non-proliferation, because that is certainly a part of the treaty. Most countries have signed it, except a few, such as India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea withdrew in 2003. But the treaty also commits nuclear weapon states of the time, which happen to be the 5 major powers of permanent members of the UNSC, to make good faith efforts in disarmament, in reduction of their stockpiles, in ending the arms race, and indeed in concluding with a universal treaty of mint. Now, we did see progress in that direction in the 70s with the SALT treaty between the US and the Soviet Union, the ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty. But then since the noughties, we have seen a major backsliding in efforts from the major powers, the great powers, the 3 great powers, US, Soviet, Russia, the inheritor of the Soviet mantle, and China, and also France and the UK, a backsliding in terms of these commitments under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which commits them to actually reduce their stockpiles. So as those promises have not been kept, naturally the Global South looks at the regime of non-proliferation and says, well, if we are keeping our part of the bargain, or most of us are, then you're not, and you haven't been for a long time. And that creates distrust, and that doesn't help the cause of nuclear stability.
It's interesting that you mentioned Article 6 of the treaty, because, Alex, I also want you to talk about that whenever tensions rise between India and Pakistan, we often hear warnings in Western media about the risk of a nuclear catastrophe. Do you think those fears are exaggerated?
Well, look, I mean, the truth is that whenever you have 2 nuclear armed states with a propensity to engage in hostilities with one another, the risk of escalation to the nuclear level is always real and always significant. You've got 2 countries in this situation that have somewhere between 170 and 172 nuclear warheads apiece. So I would say that it's not fair to characterize that particular situation as one that is exaggerated. But what I would point back to is, despite the fact that both these countries have nuclear weapons, and despite the fact that, yes, there have been repeated tensions between them over the years, the nuclear element here has actually dissuaded escalation in many respects. It is something that has served as a bulwark of restraint against going in the direction of all-out war between Islamabad and New Delhi. And there are various aspects of this to take into consideration. On the Indian side, obviously, you've got a no first use policy there that serves as a self deterrent to some extent. They've also got demated nuclear posture, and so there is a balancing act to be struck between the 2 powers. But ultimately, the reality of deterrence seems to have always prevailed in the context of South Asia, and that's a silver lining, and it's of course something that I hope continues.
You're absolutely right. Look how responsibility both India and Pakistan to a great extent have in a way conducted themselves, as opposed to the kind of headlines that we see in the in Western media. Sarang, several states outside the traditional nuclear powers, such as India, Pakistan, North Korea, have pursued nuclear weapons. From a geopolitical perspective, what drives countries to seek these weapons in the first place?
Right. So there are 3 models that explain or have tried to explain the acquisition of nuclear weapons. The first one is security. A state sees an existential threat by a nuclear power on its border, or one that threatens it in other ways. And then it tries to match that. Of course, we know that nuclear weapons are a very strong deterrence for a country being attacked by another state. So that's the one explanation. The other explanation is domestic politics, that there are bureaucracies, scientists, and other bureaucracies at home within the country that look for gains, material gains, gains in image, reputation, and so forth. And so they drive these programs as scientific programs in order to achieve certain bureaucratic goals. And the third model of explanation is prestige or status, when countries seek nuclear weapons to achieve a kind of a major power or even great power status in the international community, if they lack other dimensions of it, then they'll pursue nuclear weapons to sort of take a shortcut to getting higher status. Now, I personally favor the first one. I think if you look at the map of which countries have pursued nuclear weapons post NPT, the argument of security really is a strong driver. I'm not saying the other two models don't have relevance. It's just that they sort of complement the security explanation for nuclear weapons acquisition.
Alex, if I can now come back to the point that you were making when you answered your previous questions about how India and Pakistan and several other nations belonging to the Global South have behaved very responsibly. Some argue that these warnings, which come in from Western media, in Western construct, reflect an assumption that countries in the Global South may not behave as responsible nuclear powers. Do you think there is a very clear bias in how these risks are portrayed?
Look, I think there's certainly a perception problem in this particular context. I mean, there is a tendency we see in the West to treat the Global South like it's a monolith, when the truth couldn't be more starkly different to that. You have many countries in the Global South. The Global South is a vast geographic and conceptual entity in many respects, and countries in Southeast Asia should not be lumped in or analogized with countries in vastly different strategic environments like the Middle East, for example. So I think that's certainly a form of dissonance that's proven to be rather problematic. But remember, we have to hone in on the specificities of the geopolitical landscape. I mean, if you were to talk about, say, for example, countries in Southeast Asia, whether they pose a serious proliferation risk, then obviously the answer to that would be no, of course they do not. And some countries in Southeast Asia might have legitimate reasons to want to acquire stronger deterrence capabilities, perhaps even in the form of nuclear. But if you hone in on the Middle East and you look at a country like Iran, for example, which has a checkered history in the region and globally, then there is a legitimate concern there that a nuclear Iran might not behave in a way that's consistent with the interests of its neighbors. And so, on the one hand, yes, perhaps there is some kind of bias there. And I think the fundamental mistake is to treat the Global South as a monolith. But on the other hand, I think reducing the risk of nuclear proliferation remains to be a salient pursuit. And so if you can take steps in order to make sure that there are less nuclear weapon states, then that in and of itself, I think, is a laudable goal.
Sarang, very quickly I'll come to you for closing comments. In your previous answer, you stated that there are three primary reasons why countries actually go for nuclear powers or develop nuclear capabilities. One is, of course, security. Second is domestic politics. And third is that somehow it's a matter of prestige. Now, when you look at international role, what kind of international role there is in that, how have the policies and actions of major powers, particularly the United States, shaped attitudes towards nuclear deterrence and proliferation across the Global South?
Yeah, just to respond to my co-panelist's comment on the Global South, I think he's quite right. It's a very diverse set of states across three continents. But there's also a commonality in terms of the structure of the international system. And the nuclear question really brings about some of that. You do have a set of five major powers that are sitting in the UNSC that are permanent members that have created this norm of nuclear weapon states and then those that are outside. And indeed, the European NATO members and Japan and South Korea, which are not members of the Global South, have extended deterrence protections. So they have been given commitments by the US, mostly the US, that they will protect these states if they come under attack, including with the use of their nuclear weapons. So we do have a kind of a two-tier system. Within that, of course, within the Global South, regional dynamics, again, play a role. This is very similar to, say, looking at Africa, which we often treat as one unit. There's a commonality there, but then there are very different dynamics in the northern part, the eastern part, southern, and so forth. I would say that in general, the roles of the great powers have not been helpful in recent decades in creating a safer world. We are not going to get to a world with zero nuclear weapons, I do believe, but we can get to a world with a more stable nuclear dispensation. Less countries, ideally, that pursue them. Those that do see a security threat and pursue them, then do so in a way that is safe and indeed, contained. That doesn't lead to the sorts of crises or wars that we have seen. Now, in the case of the United States, we have unfortunately seen backsliding in terms of its commitments. Its withdrawal from the INF treaty with the Russians in 2002, its withdrawal from the ABM treaty. Recently, the New START treaty with the Russians has lapsed. And there's also, of course, the most spectacular walkout of the JCPOA with Iran. When treaty commitments are broken so casually, then of course we have to ask a question as to whether any state is going to place its trust in the international order and indeed abide by the commitments it has made. And so middle powers in the global south are looking at this dispensation and saying, how do we now pursue our security in a way that really is durable for the long term if treaties, institutions, norms are increasingly under assault? And it's not just the US, it's also other major powers. I mean, the Chinese have proliferated nuclear technology. And the French did long back before the NPT, but nevertheless, there is a record there. So we have major powers not quite comporting to their own statements, their own commitments, and that creates, of course, a normative cascade from the top down.
Yeah, you're right. There is backsliding. Thank you so much, Alex and Sarang, for helping us deconstructing the global north narrative and center the global south perspective, something that Western media rarely gets into. So if you want more of that, South Era Network is your destination. Staying with the story, but let's now focus on India, because India aims to become the next big global AI superpower. And the biggest tech giants in the world are investing heavily to build that AI infrastructure. But AI is energy intensive. It has 24/7 power needs, and data centers are likely to double India's energy demands by 2030. Now, India is looking to nuclear energy to fill that void. Billions of dollars of taxpayers' money are being invested to develop nuclear energy to power AI in India. Even private investment has been allowed for the first time in history. Is it a gamble or a well-thought-out directive? Riyata Brajbasi has this report.
India is racing to become a global AI superpower, a move set to add $1.7 trillion to its economy by 2035. But there's a massive problem. AI is energy hungry, and India's current grid is already pushed to the limit. The solution? India is going atomic. The new energy infrastructure is needed to support the nation's AI ambitions, especially as new AI commitments have come in from foreign corporations. Tech giants are pouring billions into Indian soil. Microsoft is committing $17.5 billion for its largest Asian expansion. Google is building a new hub in Andhra Pradesh, and Amazon is eyeing a $35 billion footprint. AI is seeing an investment of $700 billion globally this year, and a large portion of that capital is now being channeled towards India. AI could double India's electricity demand by 2030. Currently, 75% of that power comes from coal. To build the future, India can't rely on the fuels of the past. Enter the Shanti Bill. Passed late last year, this is a total overhaul of India's nuclear policy. For the first time ever, it opens the door for private giants like Adani and Ambani to build, own, and operate nuclear reactors. Foreign investors can invest through joint ventures with Indian firms. And the secret weapon is the SMR, Small Modular Reactor. Think of these as mini nuclear plants, factory built to power specific industrial hubs or data centers. They are faster to build, safer, and provide up to 300 megawatts of clean, localized energy. The government believes they are crucial for achieving India's 2070 net zero target by replacing coal generated power, especially because of the new demand from data centers. Modi has injected $2.6 billion to the nuclear sector this year, on top of the $2.4 billion last year for SMRs, and says how India handles AI will be consequential as when it first adopted nuclear energy.
सबसे सशक्त उदाहरण है न्यूक्लियर पावर। हमने उसका डिस्ट्रक्शन भी देखा है और सकारात्मक कंट्रीब्यूशन भी देखा है। एआई भी एक ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव पावर है। दिशाहीन हुई तो डिसरप्शन, सही दिशा मिली तो सॉल्यूशन।
Prime Minister Modi likens the power of AI to that of nuclear energy. Now one is literally powering the other. By opening the nuclear sector to private investment, India is ensuring its AI revolution doesn't run out of juice. The goal is ambitious. India plans to increase its nuclear power capacity from roughly 8.8 gigawatts today to 100 gigawatts by 2047. This is a tenfold increase in just 2 decades. Nuclear energy is not without risk. Moving from state to a private-led model raises serious questions about regulatory oversight and safety. Some experts worry giving private players a free rein in the nuclear space is a gamble. But for New Delhi, the convergence of nuclear infrastructure and AI transformation has not happened by accident. It is a conscious directive and a new blueprint for the global south. Priyata Brajbasi, South Era Network, New Delhi.
We'll discuss in this particular aspect in detail, but let's also now show you what's happening in Pakistan. Tens of thousands of people live in the shadow of a uranium mine that closed over 2 decades ago. Baghalchur fueled Pakistan's nuclear program, but when mining stopped, the concerns didn't. Residents reported dumped waste, dying livestock, and unexplained illness. The case reached Pakistan's Supreme Court and then quietly disappeared. As the world looks on to nuclear energy, we ask, what happens to the left behind? Take a look.
Nuclear power is increasingly seen as part of the global transition away from fossil fuels, but one part of the nuclear industry often receives far less attention: the environmental legacy of uranium mining and nuclear waste. In Pakistan, residents near one of the country's earliest uranium mines say they have been living with that legacy for decades. Nuclear power plants produce about 10% of the world's electricity, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Nuclear energy provides reliable electricity with minimal carbon emissions. But this industry faces a long-standing challenge: how to manage the nuclear waste and the environmental impact of uranium mining. Pakistan has relied on its nuclear power since 1972, when its first reactor began operating near Karachi. Today, the reactors run by Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission collectively supply almost 10% of the entire country's electricity. One of the earliest sources of uranium for the program was a remote mining site called Baghalchur near the city of Dera Ghazi Khan. Mining began there in 1977 and continued for more than 2 decades, producing uranium ore used in Pakistan's nuclear fuel cycle. The mines were eventually shut down around the year 2000. But concerns about the site did not end when mining stopped. In the year 2006, the local residents told reporters that they had seen the trucks of nuclear authority dumping drums of waste material into the abandoned mining sites. The villagers said that the death amongst livestock and the illnesses among residents had increased after that. They said that the nearby villages were never informed about the potential risk of radioactive dumping in their area. The local officials and the residents then moved the local courts to ask authorities to certify that the waste being dumped there was not harmful at all. The case eventually reached Pakistan's Supreme Court, which asked authorities for a report. At the time, nuclear officials said the waste was being stored safely underground and posed no danger to people or the environment. No follow-up was ever reported on the case. Around 50,000 people live in villages scattered across the hills surrounding Baghalchur. The region is considered one of the most economically underdeveloped parts of Pakistan. Investigations done by the Herald magazine and other reporters documented open mine pits, uranium tailings, and other waste materials left in the area years after the mining had stopped. Scientists such as Pakistani physicist Parvez Hoodbhoy called for independent environmental testing and medical studies to determine whether radiation exposure had affected local residents. But comprehensive long-term research has never been publicly released. For the residents living near Baghalchur's former uranium mines, that legacy remains part of everyday life. This is Hunain Amin for Sautara Network.
Joining me now from New Delhi is public policy consultant Prasanth Roy. He will talk us through the plans of India's government on the AI and nuclear energy sector. Prasanth, AI uses a huge amount of electricity, especially with data centers running round the clock. The Indian government believes nuclear energy could be the key to powering this AI boom. Do you think nuclear power is the right path for India, or are there other energy options that the country should seriously consider?
Well, this is not just about AI. The real focus is strategic autonomy, and in strategic autonomy, energy is a very key part. We are getting a sense and a taste of that right now with this whole crisis around Iran. And a lot of our liquid petroleum gas comes to the Strait of Hormuz, and there's a gas crisis in the country. Cooking, restaurants are dialing down, etc. This is something that is of very high concern. And this is part of the reason for this nuclear, the Shanti bill, etc., which we'll come to later. But it's not just AI. Now, if you come to AI, or data centers in general, and AI is one type of data center. There's also the regular cloud-based data centers. There's a massive growth. It's a small amount of the data center capacity of the world, which is currently in India, maybe 2-3%. But that is set to grow very quickly. And we have these large data centers, the so-called hyperscalers, which are coming in. Google is setting up one in Vizag in the state of Andhra Pradesh. That's going to be starting at a gigawatt and going up to much more. For those, you need, of course, you need round-the-clock power. Now, Google, Microsoft, a lot of the hyperscaler entities, they have their own net zero targets, which are far more aggressive. India has a 2070. Many of these want a 2030 level of net zero globally. So what does that mean? It means you need round-the-clock renewable energy. That is the problem. Right now, we've got renewable energy, which is pretty reliable for 8 hours. Okay, you're not covered for 16. Now the question is what you do for that 16. And data centers, whether it's AI or cloud data centers, have a fairly high baseload energy, which means that the minimum energy that continuously is being used is very high. For that, you either need, so what you would ideally need is renewable energy, which is available round the clock. And since solar is not available around the clock, you're going to need storage. Right now, that storage is not there. So one answer is nuclear. It's not necessarily the best answer in at least the short term, because this is not going to happen in the short term. The SMRs thing has just kicked off. I don't see these SMRs really going active. Definitely not in the next 5 to 6 years, maybe not in about 10 years. So you're going to need a mix of energy. Right now, it is quite a bit of coal. The grid has the capacity to take in 50% of RE. There's a lot of RE capacity which is out there, which is equivalent to 50% or more of the country's energy capacity. That doesn't mean we're consuming it all like that because of the nighttime use. So that is a huge, huge concern area. And nuclear is one of the answers the government is hoping for with SMRs, XMRs, etc. Currently, nuclear is a fairly small part of the power mix. For it to go from that 2-3%, 4% to anywhere near a 10-15% kind of level, or to take over powering even just the hyperscalers and data centers, that is a pretty long haul. And in that long haul, I expect to see other solutions coming into the mix, including storage, long-term storage solutions for renewable energy and non-fossil energy.
And from what you're saying, if India's AI infra expands as planned, energy demand, Prasanto, would that means it would double by 2030? Realistically, can nuclear power scale up fast enough to meet that demand?
No, not at all. By 2030, nuclear power is not scaling up. It's going to happen in the 2030s. So right now, what has happened is we don't have a single SMR in the country. This whole Shanti bill has just happened. There is a plan. There is a certain budget of 20,000 crore, which is like about $2.1 billion or so, which will give us these Bharat SMRs, as they're called, somewhere in the early 2030s. There's also a deal with the US, and there is the US Department of Energy, which has cleared a couple of companies. So all of that means that somewhere in the 2030s, this is going to start happening. Nothing of the requirement up to then, that is up to 2030 or 2032 or 2033, is really going to come from nuclear, except from the existing large nuclear power plants, which are expanding a little bit or scaling up a little bit. So we cannot be looking to the SMRs and the Shanti bill to solve problems of the renewable energy power, lack of availability, or even the overall strategic autonomy in energy up to about 2032 or 2033. So that is kind of where we are. Beyond that, yes, it is going to be an increasing part of the mix. And it's a great solution to have an SMR in, let's say, a hyperscaler, which is like in Vizag, and it's a 1 gigawatt hyperscaler. And imagine 300 megawatts or 400 megawatts out of that comes from nuclear. So you've got this guaranteed base load, which is round the clock, and they're not dependent on the outside grid. Or it's kind of captive and it's somewhere else, but it's supplied to them. So that's a great solution, but that's in the 2030s and maybe the mid 2030s, really.
Prasanto, very quickly, in light of what, remember, happened in the 1984 in Bhopal gas tragedy, when India privatized a sector, the kind of risk that comes with it. So in that sense, do you think nuclear power, now that India is also thinking about privatizing some aspects of it, do you think the risk could be socialized?
The risk is certainly there. Now, with the SMRs, it's a global need of the SMR industry, which is quite a fledgling industry, to ensure and to showcase that the technology is safe, and the very limited and contained use of nuclear fuel, in a way that is overall contained and there are fail safes around, etc., mean that the safety is something that is built into the system. Now, this is my argument is not that it is necessarily completely safe. Obviously, an accident can happen. If an accident happens, it's going to be reasonably serious. It's not of the Fukushima or the level of Chernobyl or anything like that anywhere at all. But what is going to happen is it's going to be a devastating hit on the SMR industry worldwide. So the companies which are developing SMR technologies, some of the large energy majors, whether it's GE or Hitachi, etc., they would be very keen to ensure that you do not have even small accidents which are not even nuclear linked. Okay, and it is like any other sector which is emerging in energy. For example, hydrogen. Okay, green hydrogen is emerging now. Imagine if there's a single accident which is not even linked to fundamentally. Nothing like the Hindenburg explosion, but some little, it's going to set back the whole. And because of that, you're going to have a lot of focus on energy, which is on safety of this energy technology from both the companies that are developing it and to an extent from the government. Having said that, very clearly, the liability has been contained, reduced, and sort of limited. So there is a limitation on the liability, without which actually, if you had unlimited liability, private companies would not want to get into this place. So you've got to look at a balance of this, that you needed this limitation of the liability, but at the same time you need safety oversight, which is going to be very strong, because if there is a single incident, it's not going to hurt only that locality, it's going to hurt that sector very significantly.
Thank you so much, Prasanto Roy, for helping us make sense of that story. Dear viewers, that's it on this special edition on nuclear. The questions are big, the stakes are bigger. And as you saw today, we just don't do peripheral commentary on news. We truly go beyond the headlines. We take you deep and we take you to the heart of the matter. If you like that kind of journalism, South Era Network is your destination. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. News continues on South Era Network.